Hello everybody. Today I'm going to show you how to make a wooden toolbox. And if you're just getting into woodworking, this is an easy project to get started with. Or if you're not getting into woodworking, you just were looking for a toolbox made out of wood, I got you covered here. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so this is what you'll need to make your wooden toolbox. I've chosen to make mine out of common board. And this is relatively cheap at your local home center. It comes in varying widths. I'll be cutting my ends and my bottom out of these boards. My side pieces will come out of this board. And then I have my 1 1/8 inch dowel. They'll be cut to length for our handle. Alright, and these are the tools that we're going to need to make the toolbox. First you'll need your measuring tools. And I have my tape measure here along with my pencil. This is a square. It's not absolutely necessary, but it is nice if you have one, to make a straight line for you to saw along. And then we have a saw here. Of course, if you have access to a chop saw or a table saw, feel free to use those. That will make your cuts go quicker. But if not, you can get one of these for $10 or $15 or less at your local home center, and they'll do the same job. And then we have our drill, and I have a 1 1/8 inch Forstner bit in here to match the diameter for my dowel. Next, you will need sandpaper. This is just 120 grit sandpaper, and we'll use this to fit the dowels for our holes. Next, you will need a hammer. I recommend using a smooth faced hammer. If you use one of the hammers that have the bumps and the ridges on it, you will see those marks after you do your nails. And then we have the finish nails. I recommend getting nails that are at least 1.5 inches in length to make sure that they hold our boards together. And then we will need some clamps that will secure pieces as we work on them. Now the first thing we need to do is make all the measurements for our cuts. So let's go ahead and make the measurement now. And I'll mark this at 16 inches. And I'll use my square to mark a line across the board, and this will be my reference point for my saw. Alright, now that we have all of our measurements made and our boards marked, let's go ahead and start making some cuts. So the first thing we're going to need to do is secure our board to the work surface here. Now you want to have your cut line far enough out so that it doesn't interfere with the work surface or your tools while you're cutting. Make sure it's nice and secure. We'll go ahead and start making the cut. Now, and you want to make sure that your blade is in line with your wrist and your arm and your shoulder, and that will help make sure that you get a straight cut. When you're making your cut, you want to make sure that the blade is doing the work. You don't want to put a lot of downward force, because that's just going to make it harder to saw. So you want to just let the blade do the work, just applying the weight of your hand as you go down. And eventually, you'll make your way through. Alright, now that I have my pieces cut to length, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the sandpaper and just run along the corners here. This will soften up the edges after you saw them. Make it a little cleaner and easier to work with. So I have one of my end pieces here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out where I'm going to be drilling the hole for our handle. I also want to lay out where I'm going to be making the cuts for our corner cuts. Now first let's make the measurements for the hole that we're going to be drilling. What we're going to do is we're going to measure down 1 inch and 9/16. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my square and I'm going to mark a line across. You just want it to go across the center of the board. Then this is going to be the height of the center of the hole. Now to find the center of the board this way, you could do this with the tape measure as well. But measure in 3 inches from that side and measure in the same distance from the other side. So I'm going to measure 3 inches from here. Now the center of those two lines is going to be the center of our board. So we just need to figure out the length of that, and it looks like it is about 1.25 inches. So half of that is going to be 5/8. So I'm going to make a mark 5/8 from one of those lines. What we'll do is take a square and mark a line going down. Now I have the center for where I'm going to drill the hole. Okay, now for my corner cuts, what I did is I measured down 2 inches from the corner and placed a mark, and I measured over 2 inches from the corner and placed a mark. And what we're going to do is we're just going to connect the lines using a straight edge. And now I have the marks for my corner cuts. And now it's time to drill the holes for our handle. Now the best way to do that is to drill one hole through both ends of the board at the same time. And now I'm sure that the hole is aligned when you go to assemble. So what I've done is I've stacked my pieces and make sure they're lined up on each end, and I've clamped them to the work surface so it doesn't move around. And you also notice that I have a scrap piece of plywood down. I have that down for two reasons. One is we want to prevent any damage to our work surface. We also want to prevent any tear out. And tear out is where, if I didn't have a backer and I was drilling through this, once the bit meets the other side of the board, it's going to start to splinter out and it'll make your piece look sloppy. And the plywood will prevent that from happening. Alright, now before we get started drilling, what we want to do first is want to make sure we get the center point lined with our point. So what we want to do is just very carefully line that point up with that corner, and then at this point you want to just push down on the bit. Now what that does is it gives us a starting point for the drill when it starts to make its outer cut. So let's go ahead and get this drilled. Now when you're drilling, you want to do your best to make sure it stays at a perfect 90-degree angle. Just to make sure that the line stays straight. And depending on your bit, you might have to clean it out as you go, so that way the blades can continue cutting. Alright, so the last piece that we need to cut is going to be our handle. Now if you notice on this box here, the handle extends out about 1 inch on each side. So in order to achieve that, we just need to add 2 inches to the total length of our toolbox, and that will give us our handle. So the length of my toolbox is going to be 16 inches. I just need to measure 18 inches on this and I'll know where to cut. And there's our handle. Alright, now is the moment of truth. Assembly time. Now this is usually when you find out if you've messed up on any of your measurements, so before you start nailing things together, it's a good idea to do a dry fit. And basically just want to line up all your pieces in the way that they're going to be assembled on the toolbox. And if everything looks good, you can go ahead and move forward with nailing. Okay, let's get started nailing some pieces together here. Now the easiest way to do this is going to be by starting with the side pieces being nailed to the bottom piece. So I'm going to take my first side piece here, I'm going to set it alongside my bottom piece, and then clamp it together. Now you want to make sure that these ends stay flush as you're tightening the clamps, because the boards tend to move around as you're tightening them. And we'll double check to make sure our boards are still aligned on each side, and then we'll drive our first hole. When I drive my nail in here, I want to be about 1/4 inch from the bottom of the board. And once you do that, watch your fingers, but just go ahead and get the nail started. And you want to make sure that the nail stays straight up and down 90 degrees so it goes straight into the board. Alright, now once you have your first nail driven in there, the boards are attached and you can go ahead and take your clamps off. And that'll make it a little bit easier to get the rest of the nails going. Now that this piece is nailed in, I'll go ahead and do the same thing for our other piece. Alright, now when you're putting on your end pieces, what you want to do is you want to get one nailed in first and lined up, so that way it's secure before you put the other end in with the dowel. Now we have this end piece assembled. I'll go ahead and put the dowel in first for the handle before I align this piece to nail it. Now the last bit of nailing that we're going to do is going to be from the bottom to these side pieces here. Alright, now once you get your bottom piece secure, your toolbox is pretty much done. You might have to play with the handle a little bit just to get it aligned this way, but other than that, this thing is done. If you wanted to paint this or stain it, I recommend giving it a light sand just to smooth everything out. Other than that, this thing is ready to hold some tools. Thank you guys for joining me today.